It was upon a raw and foggy evening in late November that the singular case of the Credit Lyonnais forgery first came to my attention. The yellow, swirling vapour that clung to the window panes of our Baker Street lodgings was so dense that it seemed to muffle the very sounds of the city, reducing the ceaseless rumble of traffic to a distant, ghostly murmur. I had laid aside my paper and was watching my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who sat hunched over a chaos of retorts and test tubes, his hawk-like features illuminated by the intermittent blue flame of a Bunsen burner. He was, at that time, absorbed in a laborious chemical analysis, the object of which was to detect the presence of bloodstains upon a tweed coat that had been sent to him by the constabulary at Reading. For several days he had spoken little, and I knew from long experience that his formidable mind was entirely consumed by the problem at hand. The clock upon the mantelpiece had just chimed 5 when our quiet domestic scene was interrupted by a frantic knocking at the door below, followed by the hurried tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stair. She entered flustered with a visiting card upon a silver salver. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced. "He is in a dreadful state, sir, quite beside himself." Holmes took the card and held it to the light. "Monsieur Armand Dubois," he read aloud, his voice betraying a flicker of interest. "Manager, London branch, Credit Lyonnais. The plot thickens, Watson. A French banker in a state of agitation on a foggy London evening has all the hallmarks of a promising affair. Show him up, Mrs. Hudson." Our visitor was a man of middle years, impeccably dressed in the French style, yet his face was pale and his hands trembled as he clutched a leather portfolio to his chest. His carefully groomed moustache seemed to bristle with anxiety, and his dark eyes darted about the room as if he feared he had been followed. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his English precise but heavily accented, "I must apologize for this intrusion. My name is Dubois. I am the chief manager of the Credit Lyonnais in London. I am faced with a catastrophe, a ruinous, inexplicable catastrophe." Holmes motioned him to the armchair opposite. "Pray compose yourself, Monsieur Dubois," he said in his calm, incisive way. "There is no trouble that cannot be illuminated by the clear light of reason. Watson, you might close the blinds. The fog appears to be making a concerted effort to join us indoors. Now, sir, you have my undivided attention. What is this catastrophe?" The banker leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is a forgery, Mr. Holmes. A forgery of such exquisite perfection that it has deceived my most experienced cashiers. A cheque for £50,000, an immense sum, has been drawn upon the account of one of our most valued clients, Lord Ashworth. We have honoured the cheque, Mr. Holmes. The money is gone. And this morning I received a communication from Lord Ashworth stating in no uncertain terms that he has never seen the cheque in his life." Holmes steepled his long, thin fingers, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar light I had come to associate with the thrill of the chase. £50,000, he murmured. "A bold stroke indeed. And Lord Ashworth is a man of considerable wealth, I presume?" "Of immense wealth," confirmed Monsieur Dubois, wringing his hands. "He is an elderly nobleman, a recluse, who resides in a great gloomy house in Mayfair. He is our largest private account holder. The potential for scandal, for a loss of confidence in my bank, is unthinkable. And the cheque itself? You have it with you? But of course." The banker nervously unfastened his portfolio and laid a single slip of paper upon the table. It was a standard cheque from the Crédit Lyonnais, filled out in a spidery, aristocratic hand. The signature, Ashworth, was little more than an elaborate scrawl, yet it possessed a certain flourish and authority. Holmes produced his powerful magnifying lens from a drawer and began to examine the document with minute attention, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a full 5 minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock and the soft hiss of the gaslight. "Extraordinary," he said at last, laying the cheque down. "The penmanship is flawless. The signature is a masterpiece of imitation. Were I not told it was a forgery, I would swear it was genuine. And yet, there is something." "Something?" cried Dubois, hope dawning in his eyes. "A mere trifle, a subconscious hesitation. Observe, Watson," he said, passing the lens to me. "Look at the downstroke of the final H. Do you see that infinitesimal tremor, a slight broadening of the ink line? A man signing his own name does so with a confident fluid motion. This stroke, however perfect in form, betrays the microscopic pause of the copyist, the fractional moment of concentration required to ensure absolute fidelity. It is the footprint of the artist in the clay." He turned back to the banker. "Tell me of the man who presented this cheque." "That is the most bewildering part, Mr. Holmes. He was, according to my head cashier, Mr. Abernathy, the most unremarkable of men. Of middle height, dressed in a plain grey suit, with a face one would forget in an instant. He spoke with a quiet, educated voice, presented the cheque, and requested the sum in large denomination notes. Mr. Abernathy, knowing the size of Lord Ashworth's account and seeing the signature to be perfect, saw no reason for suspicion. The man took the money in a Gladstone bag and walked out into the London throng. He has vanished as if he were a phantom." "A ghost in a grey suit," Holmes mused, leaning back in his chair and closing his eyes. "A fascinating problem. We have a forger of consummate skill, an accomplice of supreme anonymity, and a victim who is a pillar of society. The stage is set, the actors are in place. Now, tell me everything you know of this Lord Ashworth." Monsieur Dubois mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. "He is an eccentric, Mr. Holmes. Very old, well over 80. He has not been seen in society for 20 years. He lives with a small staff in his Mayfair mansion, surrounded by his collections. They say he has a passion for ancient manuscripts and incunabula." "And his staff?" "A butler, a housekeeper, and a private secretary. The secretary, a Mr. Alistair Finch, handles all his correspondence and financial affairs. A young man, very sharp, very ambitious." "I see," said Holmes. "The circle of those with access to his signature is therefore quite small. I shall require a genuine sample of his lordship's handwriting, and I should like to interview your cashier, Mr. Abernathy, at the earliest opportunity." "I can provide both," said Dubois eagerly. He produced another document from his portfolio, a letter from Lord Ashworth concerning a recent transaction. "As for Mr. Abernathy, he will be at the bank tomorrow morning." "Excellent. Then our course is clear. Watson and I will call upon you at the Crédit Lyonnais at 10 o'clock sharp. For now, Monsieur Dubois, I would advise you to say nothing of this to anyone. The forger believes he has succeeded. Let him enjoy his brief moment of triumph. The fox is always boldest just before the hounds pick up the scent." After the agitated banker had departed, Holmes remained for some time in silent contemplation, his chin sunk upon his chest. He took up the forged cheque once more, holding it delicately between his fingertips, his gaze distant and abstracted. "What do you make of it, Watson?" he asked suddenly. "It seems a straightforward case of fraud," I ventured. "This Secretary Finch is in a position of trust. He would have ample opportunity to study and practice his employer's signature." "Plausible, Watson, quite plausible," Holmes conceded. "And yet it is too simple. The perfection of this forgery suggests a professional, a true artist in the criminal craft. An ambitious young secretary is more likely to produce a clumsy imitation, born of greed and desperation. This," he tapped the cheque, "is the work of a master who is being directed by another mind. We are not dealing with a lone wolf, my dear fellow. We are dealing with a partnership, and it is the nature of that partnership we must uncover." He rose and crossed to his chemical bench, picking up a small pipette. "There is also the matter of the ink," he said, drawing a microscopic sample from the cheque. "Let us see what the spectroscope can tell us. Every detail, however small, is a thread in the great tapestry. We have but to find one loose end, and the entire design may unravel before our eyes." The following morning was as grey and cheerless as its predecessor, but Holmes's mood had brightened considerably. A night of chemical analysis and deep thought had left him energized and keen for the fray. "I have discovered a trifle of interest, Watson," he announced as we shared a hasty breakfast. "The ink upon the forged cheque is of a peculiar composition. It is a high-grade gall ink, but it contains a trace of aniline dye, a formulation I have encountered only once before in the papers of the case of Monsieur de Maupertuis, the French counterfeiter. It is an ink manufactured by a small firm in Lyon, not a dozen miles from the headquarters of the bank itself. A coincidence, perhaps, but a suggestive one." Our arrival at the imposing Lombard Street premises of the Credit Lyonnais was met with a palpable air of tension. Monsieur Dubois ushered us into his private office, where a nervous bird-like man of about 50 was waiting for us. This was Mr. Abernathy, the head cashier. Holmes greeted him pleasantly and immediately put him at his ease. "I do not wish to interrogate you, Mr. Abernathy," he began. "I merely wish you to paint me a picture. Take your mind back to the moment the man in the grey suit stood before your counter. Close your eyes if it helps. What did you see?" The cashier, encouraged by Holmes's gentle tone, did as he was bid. "He was utterly average, sir. Nothing to remark upon. Brown hair, clean-shaven, a face you would not look at twice. He wore a grey suit, as I said, and a dark overcoat. He carried a Gladstone bag." "His hands?" Holmes interjected. "Did you notice his hands?" "His hands?" Abernathy's brow wrinkled. "Yes, he wore grey kid gloves. Very neat." "And his voice? You said it was educated. Was there any accent, any peculiarity of speech?" "None that I could discern, sir. It was a clear, neutral English voice. He said only, 'I should like to have this in £1,000 notes, if you please.' He was calm, polite, and unremarkable in every way." "Unremarkable," Holmes repeated softly. "That is in itself a remarkable quality. A professional criminal often affects a disguise, a limp, a scar, something to misdirect the memory. To be perfectly forgettable is a disguise of another sort, and a far more effective one. One final question, Mr. Abernathy. His shoes. Did you happen to notice his shoes?" The cashier looked baffled. "His shoes, Mr. Holmes. I cannot say that I did. My counter is quite high." "A pity. said Holmes, rising. "The shoes, Watson, are often the most revealing part of a man's attire. They are the last thing a hurried impersonator thinks to change." "Well, no matter. Thank you for your time, Mr. Abernathy. You have been most helpful." Our next destination was Lord Ashworth's residence in Mayfair. It was a vast, soot-blackened edifice whose grimy windows stared out like vacant eyes onto the quiet square. The door was opened by a stern, silver-haired butler who looked as ancient and immovable as the house itself. Upon hearing Holmes's name, he showed us into a dim, cavernous library where every surface was groaning under the weight of books and yellowed manuscripts. A figure rose from a high-backed chair by the fire. He was a man of startling age, his face a web of wrinkles from which a pair of fiercely intelligent blue eyes peered out. His body was frail, but his voice when he spoke was surprisingly robust. "Mr. Holmes, I am Lord Ashworth. I trust you are here to recover my money from these thieving bankers." "I am here to uncover the truth, your lordship," Holmes replied, "which I trust will lead to the recovery of the funds. I understand this affair has caused you considerable distress." "Distress!" the old man barked. "It is an infernal nuisance. I have not signed a cheque for that amount in 20 years. The modern world is a conspiracy of charlatans and clerks. In my day, a gentleman's word was his bond." As he spoke, a younger man entered the room silently. He was tall and slender, with sleek, dark hair and an air of restless ambition that seemed at odds with the dusty stillness of the library. "Ah, Finch," said Lord Ashworth. "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, my secretary, Mr. Alistair Finch." Finch bowed slightly, his eyes appraising Holmes with a cool, intelligent curiosity. "A pleasure, Mr. Holmes. I have, of course, read of your exploits. This is a most perplexing business. I handle all of his lordship's affairs, and I can attest that no such cheque was ever drawn." "I have no doubt of that, Mr. Finch," said Holmes, his gaze lingering for a moment on the young man's immaculate attire. I noticed, as Holmes surely did, a pair of handsome gold cufflinks that glinted in the firelight. "Lord Ashworth, I have seen the forgery. It is the work of a master. To aid my investigation, I should be grateful if you would sign your name for me upon this piece of paper." He produced a fresh sheet from his notebook. The old lord took a quill pen, grumbling about the inadequacy of modern inventions, and dashed off his signature with a flourish. Holmes took the paper and compared it with the letter from Monsieur Dubois. "Thank you, your lordship. That will be most useful." His eyes swept around the room, taking in the towering shelves of priceless volumes. "You have a magnificent collection. The only thing of worth left in this degenerate age," Lord Ashworth declared. "Finch helps me to catalogue it. He has a good head for it." "I have a modest interest in early charters myself," Holmes remarked casually. "The polygraphy of the Merovingian period is a subject of some fascination. Perhaps you are familiar with the work of Mabillon?" I saw a flicker of something, was it surprise or alarm, in Alistair Finch's eyes. Lord Ashworth, however, launched into a lengthy and esoteric monologue on the subject of medieval paleography, to which Holmes listened with an expression of rapt attention. We spent another quarter of an hour in this learned discussion before Holmes deemed it time to take our leave. As we walked away from the great gloomy house, the fog once more swirling around our ankles, Holmes was unusually quiet. "Well, Watson," he said at last, "what are your impressions?" "Lord Ashworth is a genuine eccentric," I replied, "and his secretary Finch seems a capable young man. He seems devoted to his employer." "He is devoted to the collection, at any rate," Holmes corrected. "Did you observe his cuffs, Watson? Gold, and of a very fine modern design. An expensive taste for a secretary, would you not agree? And did you notice his reaction when I mentioned Mabillon? He has more than a passing knowledge of ancient texts. A very clever young man indeed." "Then you suspect him?" "I suspect everyone and no one, but consider the facts. Finch has access, Finch has knowledge, and Finch has expensive tastes. That is a dangerous combination. However, he is not our forger. He has the mind of a plotter perhaps, but not the hand of an artist. No, our master forger, the man with the Lyonnais ink on his fingers, is still out there in the fog. We must find him, Watson. To find the artist is to find the man who commissioned the work." That evening, Holmes was a whirlwind of activity. Dispatches were sent and telegrams flew from our humble sitting room to all corners of the city. Holmes spent 2 hours closeted with a grubby little man whom he introduced as a specialist in the trade of rare inks and papers. After he had left, Holmes took to pacing the floor, his mind working at a furious pace. "The problem has become more complex, and therefore more interesting," he announced, stopping abruptly in front of the fireplace. "My informant tells me that there is a rumour in the less reputable quarters of the art world of a new master in the city. A forger of genius, a Frenchman, known only by the sobriquet Le Spectre, the Ghost. He is said to be able to replicate any hand, any document with uncanny perfection. He appears for a commission and then vanishes, leaving no trace. He is our man, Watson, Le Spectre." "But how do we find a ghost?" I asked. "A ghost may be invisible, but he must still eat," Holmes replied with a grim smile. "He needs materials, paper, ink, pens of a particular quality. He requires a client to pay for his ethereal services. We have the client's masterpiece. Now we must hunt for the artist's studio." For the next 2 days, Holmes vanished from my sight. I knew he was off on one of his expeditions into the labyrinthine underworld of London, and I had no doubt that he was in some outlandish disguise. He returned late on the second night, weary and stained with grime, but with a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I have found his lair, Watson," he said, slumping into his armchair. "Or rather, I have found the web from which he operates. There is a small, dusty little shop in Soho that deals in artist supplies, a place run by a wizened Alsatian who asks no questions so long as the money is good. It is there that our Spectre acquires his special ink from Lyon. I spent the afternoon disguised as a destitute portraitist and learned that a reclusive Frenchman has been a regular customer. He pays in cash and speaks to no one." "Have you a description?" I cried. "Better, I have an address." The shopkeeper was persuaded, for a modest consideration, to have his delivery boy follow the man home. He lodges in a garret room in a tenement building near 7 Dials. "Tomorrow, Watson, we shall pay a visit to the ghost in his machine." The area around 7 Dials was a squalid warren of narrow streets and towering, dilapidated houses. It was a place of poverty and despair, a world away from the stately squares of Mayfair. Following Holmes's directions, we found the tenement, a grim, brick-faced building that seemed to sag under the weight of its own misery. "The room is on the top floor," Holmes whispered as we began the climb up the rickety, unlit staircase. "Tread softly. Our man is likely to be of a nervous disposition." The air grew staler with every floor we ascended. At the very top, a faint line of light showed beneath a peeling door. From within, we could hear the faint sound of a man humming a French folk tune. Holmes put a finger to his lips and then, without warning, tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The room was small and sparsely furnished, containing little more than a bed, a table, and a chair. But the table was a revelation. It was covered with an astonishing array of calligraphic equipment, pens of every description, bottles of ink in 100 different shades, and sheets of paper upon which were practiced signatures of every imaginable style. Bending over this table, his back to us, was a small, thin man in a paint-stained smock. So engrossed was he in his work that he had not heard us enter. "A remarkable collection of facsimiles, monsieur," said Holmes, his voice quiet but clear. The man sprang up with a terrified cry, spinning around to face us. His face was gaunt and pale, dominated by a pair of large, fearful brown eyes. He was no master criminal, but a frightened, hunted-looking creature. "Who are you?" he stammered in French. "What do you want?" "I am merely an admirer of your work," Holmes replied, switching to the same language. He picked up a sheet of paper from the table. It was covered with perfect copies of the signature of Lord Ashworth. "This is genius, monsieur. True genius. It is a pity to see such talent placed at the service of crime." The forger collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. "I am a ruined man," he sobbed. "That depends entirely upon your cooperation," said Holmes, his tone hardening. "You are known as Le Spectre. You forged a cheque for £50,000. We can discuss the matter here, or you can explain it to the gentleman at Scotland Yard. The choice is yours." The man, whose name we learned was Henri Villon, was broken. The story came tumbling out, a tale of artistic pride, poverty and coercion. He was a failed artist from Paris who had a preternatural gift for mimicry. He had fallen into bad company, using his talent for petty forgeries until his reputation reached the ears of a more ambitious criminal. "He contacted me a month ago," Villon explained, his voice trembling. "An Englishman, very clever, very persuasive. He knew of my work. He offered me a sum of money that would change my life, £5,000. "And the name of this Englishman?" Holmes pressed. "I do not know it. He was a shadow, a voice on the telephone. We met only once, at night, on the embankment. He was cloaked and wore a hat that obscured his face. He called himself the director. He gave me the materials, the sample of the signature, and his instructions. He was ruthless, monsieur. He made it clear that if I failed, or if I talked, he would find me. He knew things about my family in France. I was trapped. And after you had created the cheque, I delivered it to a drop box at Charing Cross Station, as instructed. The next day, a package with my money arrived. I was preparing to leave England forever when you found me." Holmes listened intently, his fingers drumming a silent tattoo on the table. "This director," he said. "You say you never saw his face, but you heard his voice. You are an artist, a man sensitive to nuance. What can you tell me of his speech?" Villon considered for a moment. It was the voice of a gentleman, cultured, precise, but there was something, a coldness, like steel beneath the velvet. And he was young, I'm certain of it. "I see," Holmes said, his expression grim. He turned to me. "Watson, our spider is more dangerous than I had thought. He remains in the center of the web while sending others to do his bidding. But he has made a mistake. He has underestimated his pawns. He turned back to the terrified forger. Monsieur Villon, you will remain here. You will not attempt to flee. My colleague, Dr. Watson, will stay with you. I have business to attend to. The net is closing, and I fancy the final act of this little drama is about to begin. With that, Holmes was gone, leaving me in the unenviable position of guarding a French forger in a Seven Dials garret. The hours passed slowly. Villon was sunk in a state of abject misery, and I could do little to comfort him. It was well past 9 o'clock when Holmes finally returned. He was accompanied by two burly men in plain clothes and the familiar, self-important figure of Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. "All is in readiness, Watson," Holmes said briskly. "Lestrade, your men will remain here and keep watch over Monsieur Villon. He is a key witness. Watson, you and I have an appointment in Mayfair." "Mayfair?" I exclaimed. "Good heavens, Holmes, what is your plan?" "We are going to pay a second call on Mr. Alistair Finch," he replied, a dangerous glint in his eye. "I have reason to believe that he is about to receive a visitor. A rather spectral one, in fact." A hansom cab bore us swiftly through the now thinning fog to the silent, aristocratic square where Lord Ashworth's mansion stood. We did not approach the front door, but instead slipped into the shadows of the mews at the rear of the property. I have ascertained from the butler, a man of admirable routine, that Mr. Finch often works late in the library, which is on the ground floor at the back of the house. Holmes whispered, "The window is here. If we are patient, we may be rewarded." We waited in the damp chill for what felt like an eternity. The great house was dark, save for a single lighted window, which we knew to be the library. We could see the silhouette of Alistair Finch moving about within, sorting papers at a large desk. Suddenly, a second figure appeared in the room. It was a man dressed in a simple grey suit, carrying a Gladstone bag. He had entered so silently that even Finch seemed startled by his presence. We could not hear their words, but we could see their gestures. Finch was agitated, pointing towards the bag. The man in grey shook his head. An argument seemed to break out. "It is time, Watson," Holmes hissed. "Come, and have your service revolver ready." We hurried to the front of the house. Holmes produced a curious set of instruments from his pocket, and with a few deft movements succeeded in picking the lock of the great front door. We crept into the silent, echoing hall and made our way towards the library. The angry voices were louder now. "I tell you, it is too dangerous." It was Finch's voice, sharp with fear. "To try another so soon is madness." "I need more money," replied another voice, calm and cold, the voice of a cultured gentleman. "My expenses are considerable, and your plan requires capital. You will arrange for another draft, a smaller one this time from a different account, to create a false trail." Holmes threw open the library door. "I think not," he said, standing framed in the doorway. The scene within was frozen for a moment in a tableau of shock. Alistair Finch stood with a face as white as paper. But it was his companion who drew my eye. The man in the grey suit, the anonymous ghost who had walked out of the Credit Lyonnais with a fortune, was none other than Lord Ashworth himself. He stood not as the frail, querulous octogenarian we had met, but erect and vital, his blue eyes blazing with a cold, ruthless intelligence that belied his years. The Gladstone bag lay open at his feet, filled with stacks of banknotes. "Holmes!" Finch gasped. Lord Ashworth, however, recovered in an instant. A thin, cruel smile played upon his lips. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice the same robust baritone we had heard before, "an unexpected pleasure. You have uncovered my little masquerade. I confess I am impressed." Holmes stepped into the room, his expression one of weary admiration. "It was a masterful performance, your lordship. The senile, reclusive invalid. It was almost perfect. But you made one error. You engaged a forger of genius, but you did not trust him. You felt the need to involve your secretary, to use him as your cat's paw. And Mr. Finch, I'm afraid, lacks your nerve." "The boy is a fool," Ashworth said with contempt. "He has ambition, but no stomach for the game." "So the entire story was a fabrication?" I stammered, utterly bewildered. "You forged your own cheque?" "Not precisely, my dear Watson," said Holmes. "His lordship did not forge the cheque. He merely commissioned it. He is our director. And as for the man who cashed it, he did not need a disguise. He simply had to act a part, the part he has been perfecting for 20 years. That of an old man. He stooped, he shuffled, he wore clothes that hung loosely upon him, and he became a ghost. It was you, Lord Ashworth, who walked into the Crédit Lyonnais. The cashier saw what he expected to see. A messenger, an agent, someone entirely forgettable. It was a double bluff of the highest order. The old nobleman actually chuckled. "Very good, Mr. Holmes, very good indeed. I have grown tired of my wealth, you see. The management of it is a tedious bore. The acquisition of it, however, that still holds a certain thrill. I wish to feel the excitement of the hunt one last time. It was a game, a challenge to the dullards of the financial and legal worlds. A game that has led you to ruin," Holmes said sternly, "and to the near ruin of your accomplice. You blackmailed Finch, I believe. You discovered some youthful indiscretion, some debt or folly, and used it to force him into your scheme. Finch, who had been standing as if turned to stone, finally broke. "It's true," he cried. "He found out about my gambling debts. He threatened to expose me. He made me his go-between, his man of affairs. I never wanted any part of it." "And so you concocted this elaborate plot," Holmes continued, his gaze fixed on the old lord. "You used Villon's talent to create a perfect forgery of your own signature, a signature you could then repudiate. You would have the bank's £50,000, your own fortune would remain untouched, Finch would be implicated if anything went wrong, and you would have enjoyed the intellectual sport of it all. But your greed, your desire to play the game again, was your undoing." Lord Ashworth shrugged. "One cannot win every hand. It seems, Mr. Holmes, that you have checkmated me. What happens now?" "Now," came the booming voice of Inspector Lestrade from the doorway, "you will accompany me to Scotland Yard, your lordship." The arrest was a quiet affair. Lord Ashworth, his game at an end, seemed almost relieved. Alistair Finch, a broken man, was led away separately. Back in our rooms, with a cheerful fire blazing in the grate to ward off the last of the November chill, Holmes lit his pipe and finally began to piece the whole puzzle together for my benefit. The key, Watson, was the sheer perfection of the crime. It was too neat, too flawless. The forger was a genius, the man who cashed the cheque was a ghost, and the victim was unimpeachable. It was all designed to lead us down a rabbit hole, chasing after a phantom criminal organization. But I began to question the foundation of it all, the victim. Lord Ashworth seemed genuine enough, I protested. He was a superb actor. But think of the details. He was a collector of ancient manuscripts. Who better to appreciate the art of paleography, the subtle science of handwriting? He knew what a perfect forgery would entail. Then there was the method of payment. Large banknotes, easily transportable. It was the act of a single man, not a gang who would need to divide the spoils. And Finch? Finch was my way in. His expensive cufflinks told me he was a man under financial pressure. When I mentioned the arcana of medieval charters, his flicker of recognition told me he was genuinely knowledgeable, not merely a dutiful secretary. He had the intellect to be a conspirator, but his nerve failed him. My guess is that Ashworth was pressuring him to help set up a second forgery, to muddy the waters, and the young man was on the verge of breaking. Ashworth, as the cold-blooded director, was the voice on the telephone to Lyonnais, and as the doddery old lord, he was the picture of innocence to the world. And you deduced he would be meeting Finch tonight? It was a logical certainty. With the appearance of a consulting detective on the scene, the pressure on their scheme would be immense. The partners would have to meet to decide their next move. I simply arranged to be there when they did. The greatest rogue of all is often the one in the most respectable clothing. In this case, he was not only respectable, he was practically a national treasure. He puffed on his pipe, and a cloud of blue smoke filled the room. A remarkable man in his way, Holmes mused. To have such a mind, such a flair for the dramatic, and to use it for mere crime. It is a waste, Watson, a profound and terrible waste of talent. I could only agree. As I looked out of the window, the fog had finally lifted, and the familiar lights of London glittered in the clear, cold air. The case of the forged cheque was closed, but I knew that the memory of the eccentric, brilliant, and utterly corrupt Lord Ashworth would long remain in the annals of crime, which my friend had made it his life's work to investigate.